Jake Morrison had been riding for 3 days straight, and the whiskey bottle in his saddlebag was calling his name louder than his conscience. The year was 1887, and Jake was running for more than just the law. He was running from himself. 2 months ago, he'd lost everything. His ranch, foreclosed by the bank. His brother, killed in a senseless gunfight Jake had started while drunk. His reputation, destroyed when he'd been caught stealing cattle to pay his debts. Now, with a bounty on his head and nothing left to lose, Jake Morrison was the kind of man mothers warned their daughters about. The desert sun beat down mercilessly as Jake's horse, Thunder, began to falter. They'd been pushing too hard, but Jake couldn't stop. Not here, not in Apache territory, not with the Morrison gang, his own former crew, hunting him for the money he'd stolen from their last job. "Come on, boy," Jake whispered to his horse, patting Thunder's sweat-soaked neck. "Just a little further." But Thunder's legs buckled. The horse had given everything, and now both man and beast were stranded in the middle of nowhere, with the sun setting and predators, both animal and human, beginning a prowl. That's when Jake heard it, a woman's scream carried on the desert wind. Every instinct Jake had developed over his 32 years told him to ignore it. Women meant complications. Complications meant staying in one place too long. Staying in one place too long meant death. But something about that scream, pure terror mixed with defiance, made him grab his rifle and stumble toward the sound. What he found made his blood run cold. A stagecoach lay overturned about half a mile away, smoke still rising from its smoldering remains. Bodies littered the ground, the driver, 2 passengers, horses shot where they lay. And standing over it all were 4 men Jake recognized, the Valdez brothers, the most ruthless gang this side of the Rio Grande. But it wasn't the carnage that made Jake's heart skip a beat. It was the woman. She stood defiantly against the overturned coach, her emerald dress torn and dusty, her long auburn hair whipping in the wind. Even from a distance, Jake could see she was beautiful. Not in the painted saloon girl way he was used to, but in a fierce, untamed way that reminded him of wild horses that couldn't be broken. The woman held a small derringer in her shaking hands, pointed at the largest of the Valdez brothers, Miguel. But Jake could see she was fighting a losing battle. Miguel's 3 brothers had her surrounded, and they were just toying with her now, like cats with a mouse. "Please," the woman's voice carried across the desert, strong despite her circumstances. "I have money, more than you can imagine. Just let me go." Miguel Valdez laughed, a sound like gravel grinding. "Oh, we'll take your money, señorita, but first, we're gonna have ourselves some fun." Jake closed his eyes. This wasn't his fight. He was a wanted man with nothing to offer and everything to lose. The smart thing, the only thing, was to walk away. But when he opened his eyes and saw Miguel reaching for the woman, something inside Jake Morrison, something he thought had died with his brother, sparked back to life. Thunder was done for the day, but Jake's legs still worked. He checked his Colt .45, 4 billets left. Not great odds against 4 men, but Jake had survived worse. No, that was a lie. Jake had never faced worse odds because he'd never been this broken before a fight. But maybe, just maybe, that's what made this different. Maybe, when you had nothing left to lose, you could risk everything. Jake took a deep breath, tasting dust and gunpowder on the wind. In the distance, the woman fired her derringer. Click! Empty. Miguel's laughter echoed across the desert. "That's your mistake, pretty lady. Now the real fun begins." Jake Morrison stepped out from behind the rocks, his rifle raised. "I'd say the fun's just starting, but it ain't gonna be yours." The four Valdez brothers turned, and Jake got his first good look at the woman they'd been terrorizing. She was even more beautiful up close, but it wasn't her beauty that struck him. It was her eyes, green as prairie grass after rain, and filled with a fire that matched his own. For just a moment, their gazes locked across the desert carnage, and in that moment, Jake Morrison felt something he hadn't felt in months: hope. Miguel spat in the dust. "Jake Morrison, heard you was dead." "Heard you was ugly," Jake replied, never taking his eyes off the woman. "Guess we were both disappointed." And that's when the shooting started. If Jake's story is already pulling at your heartstrings, smash that subscribe button. And I'm curious, comment below, where in the world are you watching from? The first shot came from Carlos Valdez, the youngest and most hot-headed of the brothers. His bullet whined past Jake's ear, close enough that he could feel the heat. Jake didn't flinch. Instead, he did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He smiled. "Been a while since someone shot at me and missed," Jake called out, his rifle steady. "Your brother Miguel teach you to shoot, or did you learn from a blind mule?" The insult had its intended effect. Carlos stepped forward, rage clouding his judgment, and Jake's rifle cracked like thunder. Carlos spun and dropped, clutching his shoulder. "3 left," Jake announced calmly, though his heart was hammering. "Anyone else want to dance?" But Jake had underestimated the woman. While the brothers were focused on him, she'd been moving. With Carlos down, she dove for his dropped pistol and came up firing. Her first shot took Roberto Valdez in the leg. Her second shattered the water barrel the brothers had been using for cover. And her third went wide, but it made Miguel and his remaining brother, Diego, realize they were caught in a crossfire. "Behind the rocks!" Miguel shouted, but Jake was already moving. For the next 5 minutes, the desert erupted in gunfire. Jake used every trick he'd learned in his outlaw days, rolling, diving, using the overturned stagecoach for cover. The woman, meanwhile, proved she was no helpless maiden. She moved like someone who'd been in fights before, someone who knew how to survive. When the dust settled, Carlos and Roberto were wounded but alive. Diego lay motionless behind a boulder, and Miguel Valdez was on his knees, Jake's coat pressed against the back of his head. "The lady asked you politely to leave her alone. I ain't nearly as polite." Miguel spat blood into the sand. "You got no idea what you're mixed up in, Morrison. That ain't no ordinary woman." Jake glanced at the woman, who was checking the bodies of the stagecoach passengers with the efficiency of someone who'd seen death before, too many times before. "She got a name?" Jake asked. Miguel laughed, even with a gun to his head. "Ask her yourself, but I'll give you a hint. Check her left hand." Jake frowned, but kept his gun steady. "What about her left hand?" "The tan line where her wedding ring used to be. And ask her why her dress is worth more than most people make in a year. Ask her why she was traveling with armed guards. Ask her—" "That's enough," the woman said sharply, walking over with Roberto's rifle. She was even more beautiful up close, but Jake could see something haunted in those green eyes now. Miguel Valdez always was too fond of his own voice. Jake studied her face. "You two know each other?" "We have history," she said simply. "The kind that ends with someone dead." Miguel grinned through his bloodied lips. "Tell him who you really are, Isabella. Tell him why half of Texas is looking for you." The woman, Isabella, was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked directly at Jake, and he saw something in her eyes that he recognized, the look of someone running from their past. "My name is Isabella Cartwright," she said finally. "And Miguel's right. I am worth a lot of money, dead or alive." Jake felt his stomach drop. "Cartwright? As in Judge Cartwright, the hanging judge? As in his daughter-in-law, was his daughter-in-law, until 3 months ago. The pieces started falling into place in Jake's mind, but none of them made a pretty picture. Judge Cartwright was the most powerful man in 3 territories, known for his brutal justice and his connections to the railroad barons. If his daughter-in-law was running, "What did you do?" Jake asked quietly. Isabella's laugh was bitter. "I found out what kind of man my husband really was, what kind of family I'd married into, and when I tried to leave," she touched her ribs gingerly, and Jake saw her wince. "Let's just say the Cartwrights don't believe in divorce." Miguel, still on his knees, couldn't resist twisting the knife. "Tell him about the money, Isabella. Tell him about the payroll you stole." "I didn't steal anything," Isabella snapped. "I took what was mine, what my father left me before he died." Miguel continued, ignoring her. $50,000, the railroad payroll that was supposed to go to the workers, the money that—" Isabella's rifle butt connected with Miguel's temple, and he crumpled unconscious. Jake stared at her. $50,000. More money than he'd ever seen in his life. Enough money to disappear forever, to start over somewhere new. But looking at Isabella, really looking at her, Jake saw something that made his chest tighten. She wasn't just running from the law or from an abusive family. She was running from herself, from the choices she'd been forced to make, just like him. "So," Jake said slowly, lowering his gun, "you're a rich widow with a price on her head, running from one of the most powerful families in Texas." "That about sums it up," Isabella said, watching him carefully. "And you're Jake Morrison, the outlaw with his own bounty. Seems we're both in the same boat." Jake looked around at the carnage, the dead guards, the wounded Valdez brothers, and the setting sun painting everything blood red. Thunder was still down, probably wouldn't make it through the night. They were both stranded in Apache territory with enemies closing in. Any sane man would take whatever supplies he could carry and walk away, leave the woman to fend for herself. But as Jake looked into Isabella's eyes, he realized something that terrified him more than any bounty hunter. He didn't want to be sane anymore. "Well then," Jake said slowly, lowering his gun, "I guess we'd better stick together." Isabella stared at his outstretched hand for a long moment. In the distance, coyotes began to howl, and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "You don't know what you're getting into," she warned. "The Cartwrights have men everywhere. Bounty hunters, marshals, railroad security. They won't stop until they find me." "Good thing I'm hard to kill," Jake said, still holding out his hand. "Question is, are you?" For the first time since he'd seen her, Isabella Cartwright smiled, and when she took his hand, Jake felt something he hadn't felt since his brother died. He felt like maybe, just maybe, he might be worth saving after all. But as they gathered supplies from the wreckage and prepared to leave the scene, neither of them noticed the lone rider watching from the ridge above. A man in a black duster with a silver star on his chest and cold, calculating eyes. Marshal Tom Rourke had been tracking the Morrison gang for months, but now he'd found something even better than Jake Morrison. He'd found Isabella Cartwright, and he knew exactly how much Judge Cartwright was willing to pay to get his daughter-in-law back, dead or alive. They'd been walking through the desert night for hours, leading Thunder, who was slowly recovering, when Isabella finally broke the silence that had settled between them. "You didn't have to help me," she said quietly, her voice carrying in the still air. "Back there, you could have just kept riding." Jake adjusted the supplies on Thunder's back, avoiding her gaze. "Maybe I was just tired of running alone." "Is that what you tell yourself?" Isabella's tone wasn't mocking, just curious. "Or is there another reason?" Jake stopped walking. In the moonlight, Isabella looked ethereal, like something that might disappear if he blinked too hard. "You want the truth? I've had enough lies to last a lifetime." Jake studied her face, searching for something he couldn't quite name. "When I saw you standing there, holding that derringer against 4 armed men, you reminded me of someone I used to be, before I messed everything up." They found shelter in a small cave as the desert wind picked up. Jake built a small fire while Isabella tended to a cut on her arm from the fight. In the flickering light, she looked younger somehow, vulnerable, in a way that made Jake's chest tighten. "You want to know what really happened?" Isabella asked, staring into the flames. Jake settled across from her, close enough to see the pain in her eyes. "Only if you want to tell it." Isabella was quiet for so long Jake thought she'd changed her mind. Then she began to speak. "I married Thomas Cartwright 2 years ago. My father had just died, left me his ranch and a substantial inheritance. Thomas was charming, handsome, from a respected family. I laughed bitterly. I thought I was the luckiest woman in Texas." Jake fed another stick to the fire. "What changed?" "I found out what the Cartwright family business really was. Judge Cartwright wasn't just hanging criminals, he was working with them, taking bribes to let certain outlaws go free while hanging innocent men who got in the way of railroad expansion." Jake felt his blood run cold. He'd heard rumors, but hearing it confirmed. "And Thomas?" he asked. Isabella's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Thomas was the one collecting the bribes, the one deciding who lived and who died based on how much they could pay. The $50,000 Miguel mentioned? It wasn't a railroad payroll. It was bribe money, blood money from families trying to keep their sons and husbands from the gallows." "So you took it," Jake said. It wasn't a question. "I took it and I ran, but not before—" Isabella's hand moved to her ribs again, and Jake saw the shadow of old bruises on her wrists. "That's when Thomas didn't take kindly to being robbed by his wife, or to me threatening to expose the family business." Jake's hands clenched into fists. He'd known men like Thomas Cartwright, men who used their power to hurt those who couldn't fight back. "He hurt you." "He tried to kill me," Isabella said simply. "Would have if I hadn't gotten lucky with a letter opener. That's when I knew I had to disappear completely." Jake stared at her across the fire. This woman, this incredible, fierce woman had been through hell and come out fighting, just like him, but braver, so much braver. "What were you planning to do with the money?" he asked. Isabella's eyes met his. "Give it back, every penny, to the families who paid it, to the widows of the men who died because they couldn't afford to pay it. I kept a list of names, amounts, everything." She touched a leather journal tucked inside her jacket. "That's what the Cartwrights really want back. Not just the money, the evidence." Something in her courage made Jake want to be equally honest. "My brother died because of men like your husband," he said quietly. Isabella leaned forward. "What happened?" "David was the good one, never hurt anybody, worked hard, tried to keep me on the straight and narrow. But he was also stubborn." Jake's voice grew rough. "When the railroad wanted to buy our land for nothing, David refused. Said our father left us that ranch and we weren't selling. So they framed him. Cattle rustling. David never stole so much as an apple in his life, but somehow there were witnesses. Somehow there was evidence. And somehow the judge, a man named Harrison, who I later found out was in Judge Cartwright's pocket, sentenced David to hang." Isabella reached across the fire and touched Jake's hand. Her fingers were warm, steady. "I'm so sorry." "I tried to break him out," Jake continued, staring at their joined hands. "Got drunk, made a mess of it, got 3 people killed, including a deputy. David died anyway, and I became exactly what they said he was, an outlaw." "That's not who you are," Isabella said firmly. "What you did today, saving someone you didn't even know, that's who you are." Jake looked up at her, this woman who'd been through her own hell but still had faith in his redemption. "How do you know?" "Because broken people recognize each other, and broken people can put each other back together." That's when they heard the sound that made both their hearts stop. Horses, multiple horses, moving fast in their direction. Jake was on his feet instantly, kicking dirt over the fire. "How many men does Cartwright have?" "Enough," Isabella whispered, grabbing her rifle. But this might not be them. Through a crack in the cave entrance, they saw torches moving across the desert floor. 6 riders, maybe 7, and leading them was a man in a black duster with something metallic glinting on his chest. "Marshal Star," Jake breathed. "We're surrounded." But Isabella was studying the riders with a strange expression. "That's not any marshal. That's Tom Rourke. You know him? By reputation. He's the one who caught the Dalton gang single-handed. Never met a bounty he wouldn't chase or a fugitive he couldn't find." Isabella's face was grim. "If he's here, someone paid him very well to find us." The riders were getting closer. In minutes, they'd discover the cave. Jake looked around desperately. There was another exit, a narrow passage that led deeper into the rocks, but it meant leaving thunder behind. It meant traveling on foot across hostile territory. "We can make it to the back passage," Jake whispered urgently. "If we move now." "No." Isabella's voice was calm, resolved. "I'm done running." Jake stared at her. "Isabella, they'll kill you. Or worse, they'll take you back to your husband." "Maybe. Or maybe it's time I faced this head-on." She turned to him, her green eyes fierce in the dying firelight. "But I won't ask you to stay. You didn't sign up for this fight." Jake realized he was at a crossroads. He could slip out the back passage, disappear into the desert, go back to running and drinking and trying to forget. It would be the smart play, the safe play. Or he could stay and fight alongside this remarkable woman who had already shown him more courage and hope than he'd felt in years. The choice, when it came down to it, wasn't really a choice at all. "Isabella," Jake said quietly, checking his gun, "I've been running from fights my whole life. Time I started running toward one." She smiled at him then, and Jake felt something shift in his chest, something that felt dangerously like love. "Together?" Isabella asked. "Together," Jake confirmed. Outside, Marshal Rourke's voice rang across the desert. "Jake Morrison! Isabella Cartwright! I know you're in there! Come out with your hands up, and nobody else has to die tonight!" Jake and Isabella looked at each other across the small cave. 2 broken people who'd found something worth fighting for. 2 outlaws who'd discovered they might actually be worth saving. "You ready for this?" Jake asked. Isabella checked her rifle and smiled that fierce, untamed smile that had first caught his attention. "I've been ready my whole life." Jake called out through the cave entrance. "Marshal Rourke, you want us, you're going to have to come and get us." The marshal's laughter echoed off the rocks. "Jake Morrison, you're wanted for robbery, murder, and conspiracy. Isabella Cartwright, you're wanted for theft and the murder of Thomas Cartwright." Jake spun to stare at Isabella. "You killed your husband?" Isabella's face was stone. "I told you I got lucky with a letter opener. I didn't tell you how lucky." And that's when Jake realized that this woman, this incredible, dangerous, beautiful woman, had even more secrets than he had imagined. Jake stared at Isabella, his mind reeling. "You killed your husband?" "Self-defense," Isabella said quietly, but her eyes were steel. "Thomas came at me with a fireplace poker when I threatened to expose the family business. I had a letter opener in my hand from going through his desk, looking for evidence." She touched her ribs where the old bruises had been. "He'd already broken 2 of my ribs. If I hadn't fought back—" I felt a surge of something fierce and protective. "Good," he said simply. "Bastard got what he deserved." Isabella's eyes widened slightly at his matter-of-fact acceptance. "Most people would be horrified. Most people ain't me, and most people ain't been where we've been." Outside, Marshal Rourke's voice boomed across the desert. "You've got 1 minute to come out peaceful-like. After that, my boy starts shooting, and I can't guarantee what condition you'll be in when we drag you out." Jake counted the shadows moving outside the cave entrance. 7 men, all armed, all positioned to kill. The back passage was their only escape route, but it would mean abandoning Thunder and traveling on foot through hostile territory. "Isabella, there's something I need to tell you before we die?" she asked with dark humor. "Before we fight our way out of this." Jake grabbed her hands, looking directly into those fierce green eyes. "I spent 2 years running from everything, from the law, from my guilt, from any chance of being the man my brother believed I could be. But today, fighting beside you, saving you, I remembered who I used to be, who I want to be again." Isabella's breath caught. "Jake, I'm saying I'd rather die here with you than live another day running alone." That's when they heard something that made both their hearts stop. A familiar voice calling from outside the cave. "Isabella! Isabella, darling, I know you're in there." Isabella went white as parchment. No, it's impossible." "Who is that?" Jake demanded. "Thomas, my husband. He's supposed to be dead." The voice came again, closer now. "Come out, my dear wife. We have so much to discuss, like how you tried to murder me in my sleep, and how you stole $50,000 of my family's money." Jake felt Isabella start to shake beside him. This was her worst nightmare. The man who'd tried to kill her was alive, and he'd found her. "But mostly," Thomas Cartwright continued, his voice dripping with false sweetness, "we need to discuss what happens to people who cross the Cartwright family." Jake heard Marshal Rourke's voice. "Mr. Cartwright, sir, they're holed up good in there. Might take some doing to root them out." "Then we'll smoke them out," Thomas replied coldly. "I want my wife alive, but her companion? Well, accidents happen." Jake saw Isabella's face crumple with despair. All her courage, all her fight seemed to drain away at the sound of her husband's voice. "He'll kill you. Jake, he'll torture you to death just to make me watch, and then—" She couldn't finish. Jake cupped her face in his hands. "Isabella, look at me. Look at me." When her eyes met his, he continued. "I've been dead inside for 2 years. Dead to hope, dead to love, dead to everything that makes life worth living. But you brought me back. You made me remember that some things are worth fighting for." "I love you," Jake said simply. "I know we just met. I know it's crazy, but I love you more than I ever loved anything in my life, and I'd rather die fighting for you than live without you." Isabella stared at him through her tears. "Jake, I love you too. God help me. I love you too." Jake kissed her then, fierce and desperate and full of everything they might never get to say to each other. When they broke apart, both their faces were streaked with tears. "So what's the play?" Isabella asked, wiping her eyes and reaching for her rifle. Jake smiled grimly. "We make them come to us, and we take as many of them with us as we can." But Isabella had one more card to play. She pulled out the small leather journal and held it up. "Thomas," she called out, "I know you want this back." "What are you doing?" Jake hissed. "Insurance," Isabella whispered, then louder. "Every bribe, every murder, every crime your family ever committed, it's all in here, and copies are already on their way to newspapers in 3 territories." That was a lie, but Thomas didn't know that. "You're bluffing," Thomas shouted back, but Jake could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "Try me," Isabella replied. "You kill me, and by tomorrow morning, every honest lawman in the West will know what the Cartwright family really is." The silence stretched for what felt like hours. Then Jake heard Thomas talking in low, urgent tones with Marshal Rourke. Finally, Thomas's voice rang out again. "Fine, Isabella, you win this round, but this isn't over." "The hell it isn't!" Jake shouted and burst from the cave. What followed was the most intense gunfight of Jake's outlaw career. But this time, he wasn't fighting for money or revenge. He was fighting for love, for justice, for the chance at a life worth living. Isabella was right beside him, her rifle cracking like thunder. Together they were unstoppable, two people who'd found something worth dying for, which made them impossible to kill. When the smoke cleared, Marshal Rourke lay dead, along with 3 of his men. Thomas Cartwright was wounded and on his knees, his face twisted with rage and pain. "You think you've won?" Thomas snarled at Isabella. "My father will hunt you to the ends of the earth." "Let him try," Jake said quietly, his gun trained on Thomas. 2 weeks later, Jake and Isabella sat on the porch of a small cabin outside Denver. The Journal had indeed made it to the newspapers, and the Cartwright empire was crumbling. Judge Cartwright was under federal investigation. Thomas was in prison awaiting trial, and Jake and Isabella were free. "So what now, Jake?" asked her, taking her hand. Isabella smiled, that wild, untamed smile that had first captured his heart. "Now we live, really live. Maybe settle down, maybe keep moving. Doesn't matter as long as we're together." Jake brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Mrs. Morrison has a nice ring to it. Is that a proposal, Jake Morrison?" Jake got down on one knee right there on the porch, taking both her hands in his hands. "Isabella Cartwright, you saved my life in every way a person can be saved. Will you marry me?" Through happy tears, Isabella whispered, "Yes. Yes, you beautiful, broken, perfect man. Yes." As the sun set over the Colorado mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, 2 broken souls held each other close and looked toward a future full of hope. They'd found each other in the darkest moment of their lives, and together they'd discovered that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with the words, "and." And that's the power of love in the Wild West, folks. This is Tony Tells Tales, where every story has heart, every character gets redemption, and love always wins. Smash that subscribe button if Jake and Isabella's journey moved you, and comment below, what's your favorite Western love story? Share this tale with someone who believes in second chances.